everyone! Today I'm going to teach you a little bit about vermicomposting and show you what my worm bin looks like and how you can make one at home for yourself. So worm bins are pretty simple. You really only need a plastic container or something that can hold water, something with a lid. If it doesn't have a clasping lid, you can cut a piece of cardboard, the outside of your container, and put that on top. It doesn't have to seal. And then the last requirement is it needs to have holes in it. So you want to make enough holes to let air in, but not too many holes that the worms will be able to get out easily. And then for this worm bin, what I did, but you don't have to do, is I cut holes in the bottom, just 4 holes in the bottom, and I put this little tray underneath of it to catch the liquid that's going to come out once the worms start eating all the food. For supplies, what you're going to need are egg cartons or cardboard, some newspapers but not the glossy kind, and then I keep my food scraps that I'm going to feed to my worms inside a separate container from my regular compost bin. So this is my specific worm food container, and I'll go over what worms really like to eat a little bit later. So I'm going to pretend that this is my worm bin, just so you can see how to start a brand new one and what kind of mixture you're going to want to put in it. So I start with a little bit of soil, not very much, but just like a tiny sprinkling, and you're going to kind of want to put probably about this, just like a light covering in the bottom of your bin, just so that the worms aren't sitting on plastic. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your newspaper and you're going to rip it up into 1-inch strips. So once your newspaper is about this size, worms aren't super picky about their interior decorating, so if it's not exactly the same, they won't complain too much. So you take your newspaper and you're going to want it to get wet. So you're going to sprinkle a little bit on the top and then mix it all up nice and wet. And then you will squeeze it out because you want it damp but not sopping wet. And then you're going to spread it out a nice layer in your bin. Now that your layer has all been spread out, you will take 1 or 2 more handfuls of your soil and sprinkle that on top of your newspaper. The soil is important because worms have gullets like owls, so they need to eat a little bit of hard, rocky soil along with whatever fruit or vegetable you are feeding them. This is the point where if I was making this an actual worm bin, I would put my worms in. I would give them a little mix so that they're not all sitting on top. And then I would place a wet or a dry piece of newspaper right on top. And then I would put my lid and I would be done. I've had this worm bin for about 6 months. So let's take a look at what an older bin looks like. As you can see, my paper towel that I have on top is damp. I usually go for the damp one because then I don't have to mist it as frequently, but it depends on your worms and what makes your worms the happiest. So as you can see, there's a lot of newspaper in here, and intermixed with the newspaper are bits of the egg carton that I have ripped up and gotten wet and sprinkled in. I also have some eggshells. I have a lot of worms. Let me see if I can find you guys a good handful to show you here. So there's one. So if you notice, these worms are really fast and they're kind of small compared to the weekly bug, the earthworm. So this worm is a red wiggler. Red wigglers are perfect for composting because they eat about 3 times their body weight each week. So if I have one 5-inch worm, that might not seem like a lot of food, but if I have 150 5-inch worms, it adds up to a bit of food waste. So they eat your food waste, they turn it into this really nutrient-packed compost that we can put in our plants, in our gardens, and it really helps them grow quicker and bigger. So once you have an established worm bin, the trick is figuring out how you're going to get this beautiful compost into your garden beds without taking the worms out. Because unlike earthworms, red wigglers do not live in New England. It is too cold. Since they are so small, they can't burrow as deep as earthworms do. So they need it to be somewhere warm. They only live in the top couple inches of the soil, which makes them great composters, but you can't just put them in your home garden. So when we are ready to harvest our compost, what I'm going to do is take my bin and I'm only going to feed half of it. So my strategy for getting all the soil on one side and all the worms on the other side is to kind of push everything to this right side, including all the worms. And then I'm only going to put my new food and new newspaper to this empty side. The reason I'll do this is when all the food runs out on this side, all the worms will move over to this side to enjoy their new food, leaving this side with only the soil and decomposed things that I can then remove, place in my garden, and start all over. Let's figure out exactly what we're going to feed our worms for lunch. I have found that worms really enjoy apple cores. These seem to be one of the quickest things to be eaten in my worm bin, so I save all of my apple cores for my worms. So I'll put 2 of those apple cores in here. They also really like coffee grounds. So if you have access to coffee grounds, I recommend sprinkling in a couple handfuls of those. I have some other apples in this container as well. So I'm going to put all my apple cores and my coffee grounds on this side. I'm going to pick out some of these old eggshells and put on this side as well, just so the worms don't want to hang out on that side too much. So this side looks really good. I'm going to do a light covering of the newspaper and things from this side, but then I'm going to add all new newspaper. So I'm going to take that newspaper that I used for my fake worm bin earlier, and I'm going to sprinkle it on top over here, just like that. And hopefully all the worms that are in the old side will want to live on my new side and be very happy, and I can take their compost and put it in my garden. Enjoy your worm bins and reap the benefits of beautiful compost made in your very own house to put in your garden and feed your plants. I will end this video by asking you, what did the mom worm say to the son worm when he came home late one afternoon? Where in earth have you been?